They called her ugly, not once, not in passing, but always, with every glance, every whispered word behind her back. Camilla had grown used to it, the way one grows used to cold water on the skin, still stinging, but easier to bear with time. She had been humiliated her whole life, until the day her own father gave her away, not to a suitor, not to a man of her choosing, but to an Apache warrior. No one expected what she would discover in that village beyond the mountains, a truth deep enough to shatter everything, and a betrayal that would bind and break two families. But before we begin, pause for a moment. Tell me, do you believe love can rise from rejection? In the village of San Dolores, the bells rang twice a day, once at dawn to summon life into motion, and once at dusk to remind everyone that nothing lasts. It was a forgotten town, cradled between dry mountain ridges and the northern wind. Time didn't move there, neither did the people. The women still wore long skirts and scrubbed laundry on river stones. They whispered about anything different, anything they didn't understand, anything that didn't fit their narrow idea of beauty. Camilla had grown up in that stillness, the eldest daughter of Don Ezequiel Montemayor, a landowner as feared as he was obeyed. Her younger sisters, Maria and Isabella, had inherited their mother's golden beauty. Camilla had not. Her skin was dusky, her hair coal black, her gaze too deep, too knowing. She didn't sparkle, she didn't shine, she simply existed. She had heard it since she was a child. Your beauty is on the inside. But no one, not the women at church, not the boys in the plaza, not even her father, ever looked there. To him, she was a flaw in his legacy, a shadow at the edge of a bright canvas. But Camilla was not meek. She sewed with care, swept the stone patio while humming softly, and held quiet dreams, dreams too fragile to speak aloud. Sometimes at sunset, when the sky blushed pink, she imagined someone choosing her, not as a duty, not as a bargain, but as a woman, wanted, seen. No one ever did, until the messenger of war arrived. The Apache tribes beyond the mountains had offered peace, a treaty, land, horses, and one bride, a symbol of alliance. Nahuel, the warrior chosen to receive her, was tall and silent. His eyes held the stillness of ancient rivers. He agreed to the terms, but demanded a wife from San Dolores. The councilman shifted uncomfortably. Don Ezequiel stood. With a voice like cracked stone, he said, "I have a daughter who will seal this peace." Camilla heard it from behind a half-open door. The world tilted. Her chest went hollow. Her soul froze. She stepped into the room. Her father didn't look at her. "It's for the good of the people," he muttered. That night she didn't cry. She sat before a cracked mirror, tracing the lines of her own face. Was she ugly, strange, or simply herself? 2 weeks later, the village gathered in the plaza. The bells rang once. Camilla wore a plain beige dress she'd embroidered herself, a single red flower in her hair, her only rebellion. She walked with her head high, though her heart was heavy as iron. Nahuel waited on horseback. He didn't stare, he didn't smile. His eyes were calm, not indifferent, but ancient. When she stood before him, the crowd held its breath. They expected him to turn away. Instead, Nahuel dismounted, looked her in the eye, and nodded. He accepted her. No vows, no celebration, no kisses. Camilla left her village, not as a bride, but as a symbol, a body traded for peace. She looked back once. No one waved, no one wept. Even the wind seemed to turn its back. The journey took 3 days and 2 nights, across dust-blown valleys and hills that whispered forgotten truths. Camilla said nothing. She didn't know whether to mourn what she'd lost or fear what lay ahead. Nahuel didn't speak either. His silence felt ancient, like a weight passed down through generations. At night, he built their shelter with careful hands. He never touched her, never imposed. That surprised her. She had braced for cruelty. Instead, she found distance and respect. When the cold bit through the night, he left a poncho by the fire, without a word. She huddled beneath it, listening to the wind howl through the brush. He sat beside the fire, eyes wide open, keeping watch, always. On the third day, they reached Apache territory, a village surrounded by red mountains and scattered cacti. Children darted between tents, women gathered herbs. The air smelled of earth, wood smoke, and something older than words. Camilla dismounted, her knees weak, her heartbeat loud. They stared, not with scorn, but with curiosity. They wanted to know who she was, not just what she looked like. A shaman stepped forward, cloaked in skins, necklaces made of bone and shell. He spoke in Apache, then translated, "May the new flower be received with respect. May this union bring peace to a wounded land." Camilla waited for someone to say it was a mistake, that she could go home. No one did. Nahuel extended his hand, open, steady. She hesitated, then placed her fingers lightly in his. That was all. No rings, no veil, only silence, and a pact between two worlds. In the days that followed, Camilla learned what it meant to live between worlds. Her home was a small tent of hides and woven straw, a clay jar of water, a mat, a thick blanket. She sat at the doorway every morning, watching the sun rise. The women studied her. Some smiled, others whispered. She felt like a thorn in a bed of flowers. At night, her father's words came back to her like knives. "No one will cry for you." And yet, something began to stir. Nahuel. He left early, returned with roots, fruit, a necklace made of seeds, a wooden figure carved from cedar. Each act chipped away at her defenses. Kindness, she found, was harder to accept than cruelty. It confused her, hurt more than harshness ever had. One night she finally asked, "Why didn't you reject me, like the others would have?" He didn't pause. His voice was low, steady, like distant thunder. "Because I do not see with the eyes of white men." She turned away, tears pricking at her eyes. Her throat closed. Her chest was tight, corrected "is" to match past tense. For the first time in her life, someone had seen all of her. Not the version they wanted, but the woman she was. And yet, it was too soon to trust. Her heart, still wounded and wary, couldn't yet see what was blooming quietly between them. That sometimes true love begins in silence. The silence of the Apache village was so dense, so absolute, it rang in her ears like pressure underwater. Every step she took on the wet, breathing earth felt like a silent cry, for release, for distance. But she wasn't running from Nahuel. She was running from what he awakened in her. A fragile, wordless tenderness that made her chest ache. A gaze that didn't just look at her, it saw her. Her heart stuttered like a caged sparrow. She didn't know where her feet were taking her, only that she needed to go, to breathe, to escape the feeling curling around her like an unfamiliar embrace, one she didn't know how to receive, not when she'd been raised for rejection. She walked for hours, long before the sun dared rise. Stones sliced the soles of her feet. She climbed a narrow mountain path with no destination, and no courage to glance behind her. The world grew rough, red stone, withered thorns, crows slicing the sky with their cries. Fear rose loud inside her, louder than the wind. Still, she walked, until the earth turned on her. She tripped, her body twisted, and then came the crack. Dull, wet. Her skull struck a stone. Darkness fell like a curtain, even darker than before. And then, nothing. When her eyes fluttered open again, The world was still cloaked in shadow. Hours had passed, but something warm pressed against her forehead. A hand. His hand. Nahuel sat beside her, silent, his eyes resting on her face, not judging, not questioning, just present. She tried to pull away. Her limbs wouldn't obey. Her skull throbbed with white-hot pain. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you're my responsibility," he said. Quiet, steady, unshakable. But she felt it, something deeper beneath those words, a current in his gaze. Anger, yes, but also care, fierce, unspoken. He wrapped her in a heavy blanket, lifted her onto his horse, and carried her home. During the ride, her back leaned into the quiet heat of his chest. Smoke, leather, breath. She closed her eyes, not to forget, but finally to rest. In the days that followed, he stayed, always nearby. He changed her dressings, boiled bitter herbs into steaming broth, whispered Apache words she didn't understand, but felt old as prayer. Then the women came, quiet, cautious. They left flowers, fruit, the soft curve of a smile, and Camilla began to feel something she'd never known. Not just tolerated, not merely seen, cared for, wanted, not for her face, but for her being. One afternoon she woke to a small carving beside her bed. A woman, hands pressed to her chest, etched in the wood, in shaky Spanish. Fuerte por dentro, strong inside, from Nahuel. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, and for the first time, she wept. Not from sorrow, but from relief, because here she didn't have to earn her place. She could simply exist. That night, she sat outside her tent, watching stars burn like promises. Beside her, Nahuel, not speaking, not asking, just breathing beside her. In that stillness, something took root. Not love, not yet, but the seed of it, a beginning. The village moved in its own rhythm, sunrises and birdsong guiding the hours. Camilla, still healing, stepped slowly out from behind the curtain of fear. Time no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a soft, slow dance, one she was learning step by step. At first, the women kept their distance. Then one came forward, Yara, steady gaze, sun-worn skin. She placed a torn blanket in Camilla's lap. "Do you know how to sew?" Camilla didn't answer. She just studied the weave, nodded once, and began. Under the shade of a tree, her fingers rediscovered their rhythm. Needle and thread, no silk, no perfection, no father's voice hovering overhead, just cloth and freedom. Yara returned, with more women, worn garments, empty satchels, raw hides. Camilla barely spoke, but the silence no longer stung, and slowly their eyes softened. They no longer saw a stranger. They saw kin. With every stitch, she wasn't just repairing fabric. She was sewing herself whole. She learned to dye cloth with roots, to braid stories into leather, to cook maize and hum the broken lullabies of her childhood. Children gathered near, drawn by her quiet voice. One little girl, small as a blossom, took her hand and asked, "Are you a princess?" Camilla laughed, a sound that surprised even herself. "No, little one, just someone who finally learned how to stay." And Nahuel, he watched, from a distance, never pressing, never pulling, but his eyes, they said everything. When she passed with baskets, he'd nod and say, "You work well." And those 3 words meant more than any poem ever had. Then came a windy afternoon. Dust curled through the village like breath. Nahuel approached, leather bundle in hand. "It's for you," he said. Inside, a dress, simple, hand-stitched, sturdy, honest, not beautiful by her old world's rules, but made with care, with intention. She didn't speak, just held it to her chest, and smiled. At that moment she understood. She was changing, not for him, for herself. Something inside her had survived, something the world once tried to extinguish, and now It had a name: dignity. She was no longer a bargaining chip, no longer the discarded daughter. She was Camilla, a woman of quiet fire, of healing hands, of a heart that, though scarred, was beginning to want again. And that want, it had eyes dark as mountain shadows, and the patience of time. That day the wind turned softer. The sky was gray, hushed. Camilla walked between the tents, basket in hand, when a young boy ran toward her. "There's a gift for you," he panted, holding out a small rolled cloth. Inside, a key, rusted, ancient. "It came with traders from town," the boy said. Her breath stopped. She knew this key. She'd seen it once, years ago, dangling from the housekeeper's neck. Her mother's key, the one that vanished the day she was buried. The ground tilted beneath her, her vision blurred, but her mind was clear. She knew what had to be done. With the elders' permission, she walked to a stone hut on the village's edge, a place Nahuel had helped build, used to store trade goods. And there, hidden among baskets and folded rugs, she found it, the chest, dark wood, untouched, waiting. Her fingers shook as she turned the key. Click. The sound echoed through her like a shiver. She lifted the lid, and the scent of dried flowers rose into the air. Inside, letters, embroidered fabrics, a journal, her mother's voice, waiting to be read. Camilla sat on the packed dirt floor, her heart pounding like a war drum. Fingers trembling, she opened the worn journal, and the past came pouring out like smoke from a forgotten fire. The handwriting was unmistakable, rounded, delicate, her mother's. At first, it was gentle, stories of youth, dreams of escape, hopes of one day marrying for love. But then, the ink darkened, the words turned sharp. "I loved a man before Ezekiel, a man with eyes like fire, and a soul carved from stone. Apache. His name was Atson. He was my secret, my escape, my sin." Camilla's breath caught. "I ran away with him for 7 days. I swore I'd leave everything behind. But they found me. They dragged me back, told me my shame would be buried in silence. No one would ever know. But I was already carrying his child. And Ezekiel, he accepted it. Not out of love, out of pride, out of convenience. My daughter was born with dark eyes and brown skin, a mark of the blood she carried. She will never know. She must never know. She is my punishment and my secret, buried beneath silence." Camilla let the journal slip from her fingers. Her hands covered her face, and then, the flood. Tears came like rain breaking a long drought, uninvited and relentless. She screamed, alone in the cabin, the sound swallowed by the walls. She wasn't Ezekiel's daughter. She was the child of an Apache. Everything made sense now. Her father's cold eyes, her sister's thin-lipped contempt, the way she always felt foreign in her own home. But with the pain came something darker. Panic. Sinael. He was her brother. And Nahuel. His eyes, his silences, the way he watched her, cared for her. Was that why? Did he know? Was this all a cruel game? Or was he carrying the same gnawing fear? She didn't wait to think. She ran. Through dust and branches, with legs that barely obeyed, her tears stung like salt in the wind. She found him beneath the tree. Nahuel. Alone, braiding leather, the world moving slowly around him. "Who am I to you?" she cried out, voice breaking like waves against stone. He stood, eyes steady, face tight with something too heavy to name. "I read the journal," she choked, clutching it to her chest. "My mother, my father, you, we're siblings." He didn't flinch, didn't blink. Silence fell like a curtain between them. Then he spoke, his voice low, heavy as dusk. "I knew there was a story. The elders whispered, but I never knew her name. I never knew you were the daughter." Camilla's breath turned to ash. He stepped forward, gently took the journal from her, flipped through the pages, stopped. "Atsin," he murmured. "He was my uncle." The ground tilted beneath her. She collapsed, but he caught her, held her. "You are not my sister, Camilla," he said, his voice clear, certain. "You never were." She wept into him, and he didn't let go. And in that moment, in the middle of bloodlines, pain, and shattered truths, something else was born, not from duty, not from war, but from freedom. That night, the sky glimmered like glass. But for Camilla, the world was foggy. Her mind still echoed with the words from the journal, with the name of the man who had been her true father, with the truth that Nahuel was not her brother, but the nephew of a man lost to time. She walked aimlessly, her feet dragging through dry earth, her eyes swollen, her soul stripped bare. The firelight of the village flickered in the distance like a heartbeat, but she wasn't ready to return. She had nothing left, no name, no shame, no mask. That's when she heard footsteps behind her, slow, deliberate. Nahuel. He approached without weapons, without pride, without disguise. Just a man, walking toward her with the weight of unspoken truths in his chest. "I had doubts too," he said quietly, his voice like wind through trees. "I knew Atsin had a daughter, but I never knew her name." She lifted her gaze. The moon lit his face, and for the first time, she saw the grief etched in him, not just for her, but for everything both of them had lost, because of a story never told. "You never suspected," she whispered. He looked away. "I did. That's why I stayed silent. That's why I never let myself come close. Because if you were my sister, I'd rather keep my distance than hurt you with a feeling I could not bury." Camilla closed her eyes, because at that moment, she understood. He had loved her, quietly, carefully, from the very beginning, held it back, out of respect, out of fear. "And now," she asked, her voice unsteady, "now that we know the truth, what do we do with everything we feel?" He didn't answer right away. He bent down, picked up a small stone, turned it over in his palm. Then finally, "Now, you choose." She looked at him, the man who had offered dignity when the world gave her disgrace, the man who never touched her, even when he ached, the man who had seen her, truly seen her, long before she could see herself. "You knew I was different," she said quietly, almost to herself. "And still, you never looked away." He nodded once, then asked, "Do you still want to run?" Her throat closed, but not from grief, from release. Camilla stepped forward, then another. She placed her hands on his face, felt the sun-worn skin, the warmth, the stillness that no longer hurt, but held her. "No," she whispered, "I don't want to run anymore." And beneath the ancient stars of the mountain sky, she kissed him, not with hunger, not with need, but with choice. A kiss that was quiet, and whole, and real. The kind of kiss shared by two broken souls, not claiming each other, but meeting each other. When they pulled apart, her eyes were still wet, but something new glowed behind them. Nahuel saw it, and smiled. "You are the flower that bloomed in stone," he whispered, and she smiled back, because she finally understood. The beauty they always denied her was never in her face. It was in her will to endure. Camilla looked around. The very faces that once dismissed her, now they couldn't look away. But it wasn't beauty that held them, not the curve of her cheek or the way the light caught her skin. It was the way she moved, how she spoke, how she simply existed. She had become a presence itself. "I didn't return for your approval," she said, her voice steady, calm. "I returned because I became more than you ever allowed me to be." The village women lowered their eyes in silence. Don Ezekiel stepped forward, straining to keep control, his pride splintering. "You are no Montemayor by blood," he spat, each word bitter. "You never were." Camilla approached him slowly. "Thank God," she replied, gently, almost like a blessing. She turned to the villagers, her voice rising, not in volume but in weight. "I no longer carry the name of a man who denied me. I carry the name my heart gave me, and today he stands beside me." She reached for Nahuel's hand. He took it, unflinching, and for the first time in her life, Camilla felt truly seen, and more than that, respected. That day, the village witnessed something it had never known. That true beauty doesn't shimmer on the skin. It pulses in the courage of those who face their past with dignity. The girl they once called ugly had become light. The sun had begun to rise, casting gold over the mountain's jagged edge. The sky, once blood red, softened into orange silk, and in the wind, a mix of wild flowers, damp earth, and burnt herbs. It was a day of ritual. Camilla had woken early. She dressed in a pale tunic she had sewn by hand. Threads curved like the flight of birds. In her braid, she wove seeds, feathers, and tiny copper charms. Each strand a memory, each detail a step toward rebirth. The village women waited in a circle around the great fire. Yara, once a stranger, now a sister, placed a small clay cup in her hands. "Today you are born again," Camilla whispered to herself. She stepped into the center, where the shaman awaited her, a necklace of red beads in one hand, a carved wooden staff in the other. Silence blanketed them. Even the children, wide-eyed and still, seemed to know something sacred was unfolding. And Nahuel stood at the edge of the circle, arms folded, gaze steady, no longer a protector, now a partner, witness, alive for her transformation. The shaman raised his hand, smoke drifting into the dawn air, fragrant and slow. Then he spoke, voice like wind carved from stone, ancient, worn. "Before this land, before our ancestors, before the great spirit that sees all, we give a new name to the one who arrived in pain, endured in silence, and now rises in honor." Camilla felt a fire in her chest, not fear, but feeling. Everything she had lost was now finding its way back into her. "From this day forth," the shaman continued, "you will be known as Itzaltaya, light on the rock." The name filled the air. It was different, whole, timeless. It bore no mark of rejection, no insult to her appearance. It was hers, chosen by soul, praised by the earth. Camilla closed her eyes. Tears slid down her cheeks, not from pain, but gratitude. The necklace was placed around her neck, the staff given to her hands, not as a weapon, but as a symbol of wisdom and leadership. It was the rebirth of a woman who had once been nothing, invisible, undesired, traded. Now she was a guide. In the days that followed, Camilla, now Itzel, began to teach. She created a place for children to draw letters, count stars, and listen to the stories of old. She stitched together the knowledge of her ancestors with the words of the colonizers. Like cloth woven carefully, respectfully, men and women came to her not out of fear, but trust. Because in her they saw strength without harshness, a voice that didn't need to shout, power without pride, and all called her by her new name. Nahuel built beside her a house of stone and wood. They planted flowers, shelved books, wrote new stories. He never stopped being a warrior. But with her, he learned that love was the greatest battle and the most beautiful. One evening, beneath the same sky that had once witnessed their meeting, Itzel sat beside him at their doorstep. Once Camilla, now whole. The breeze stirred the trees. The world was quiet. "If you could return to the day I was given away," she asked softly, "would you still accept me?" Nahuel smiled. No hesitation. No, because now you chose to stay. And in that answer, the end of one story and the beginning of a new world. Years passed. The name Itzaltaya had long been spoken across the land. Fine lines traced her eyes now, but her gaze burned brighter than ever. The woman once labeled ugly, discarded, forgotten, was now a teacher, leader, symbol of identity. Spring had returned, and wildflowers cloaked the hills like embroidery. In the village center, young girls sat in a circle, laughing, eyes gleaming, ribbons in their hair. At the heart of the group, a young woman of 30, she opened a weathered book, thick-covered, yellow page. Today, she smiled, we'll hear the story of a woman born in chains, who became queen of her own fate. She turned the page, handwritten in graceful script, daughter of earth and fire. They say she was ugly, Nayeli began gently. No sparkle in her eyes, no beauty in her face. They say she was given away out of shame. But what no one knew was that she held a beauty the world couldn't see, because the world had blind eyes. The girls sighed. One whispered, "It sounds like a queen's story." Nayeli continued, "She was taken to distant lands, places feared by white men, and there, among mountains and silence, she met someone who didn't look with his eyes, but with his soul. He asked for nothing, demanded nothing, and helped her remember who she really was." She paused, looked at their small faces, wide with wonder. "But the most beautiful part," she said, her voice breaking slightly, "is that she didn't wait to be saved. She rebuilt herself, stitched her dignity with her own hands, chose love, chose to stay, and when the world thought it knew her worth, she proved it was greater than any mirror could show." Silence fell over the group. "Do you know what happened?" Nayeli asked with a smile. "She became part of history, of the village, of respect, and her name is still whispered every time a girl learns that she doesn't need to be beautiful, to be magnificent." The girls clapped, not wildly, but gently, reverently. Nayeli closed the book with care. In the distance, at her doorway, stood Itzal, her silver hair tied in a high knot, a quiet smile on her lips. Beside her, Nahuel wove dry branches into a sculpture of wood. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Around them grew a new generation, built on roots, on memory, on fire, and on forgiveness. Because Camilla didn't triumph despite her pain, she triumphed because of it. And her story didn't end with her. It became a flame for every girl who ever felt invisible. Proof that worth isn't found in a reflection, but in the fire that dares to burn, even in darkness.